Back again. Today's video is called Spirit War Boot Camp number 88, and this is called Introduction to Quantum Biology in the Spirit War. So how's everyone doing? I'm doing so great. There's been a big gap since the previous video, but we're continuing exactly on the lines that we were establishing. And the reason it's been such a long break is I've been pouring over multi-hours a day all the research into something called OR theory by Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrose, which stands for Orchestrated Objective Reduction. And this is what I would consider the first foray into what I'm calling quantum biology as far as this series goes. So what I want to show is the reason why I chose this topic and the reason why I've been studying OR for a couple months now in depth is that it completely overlaps with everything I'm trying to explain in the Spirit War. And that starts with the idea that I said since the very beginning is that the main and most significant area of conflict and influence, in my opinion, in the world today is what I'm calling the Spirit War. And it's a domain that is invisible to the common senses and indefensible to a person who has no concept of the domain of spirit and has bought into the delusional materialism of our modern society and believing that engaging on the material plane is all that is truly real, all that is relevant, and so on, despite the fact that matter as we know it and all material pursuits are not only impossible without energy, but in essence matter itself is just a massive concentration of energy and information. And so if you neglect the sciences of energy and information and neglect the concept of what I'm calling the spirit realm as a resource, first of all, and as a domain of conflict and influence, then you have no chance to stand against the attacks that are being levied against all humanity as a whole. So now we're going to try and way backtrack and just get and say why is this OR overlapping with Spirit War? Well, it involves a lot of things that are, up until the past 100 years were not considered part of science, that were considered part of spirituality. So in other words, things like retrocausality, for instance, things like action at a distance, or so-called quantum entanglement or non-locality and stuff like that. These are all things that were used in the domain of what we would call magic and voodoo and stuff like that, right? The idea that things that come into a certain type of intimate contact are forever connected throughout space and time. So what we're calling like photon entanglement in physics and stuff like that. And this has increasingly become foundational to the fringe and the cutting edge of all sciences. And going back even to Max Planck in the early 1900s, considered one of the pioneers along with Schrödinger of quantum theory as a whole, he basically stated that consciousness is the fundamental basis of all material reality. And again, this is very close to what we're using as the Spirit War. But in the past 100 years, obviously this has become more and more evident as time goes on. And we have more and more experimental confirmation of this principle. And so now let's talk about OR in specific. So the idea behind OR, which was started primarily by an anesthesiologist, Stuart Hameroff, because he was trying to find a way to understand the function of anesthesia and how it works in the brain. And also, of course, to basically address certain unaddressed components that were known about human physiology, like wide area gamma synchrony, for instance. So the idea in traditional neurology is that everything's mediated through the nerves, that consciousness and cognition and all our sensory motor relay is mediated by the nervous system. And while that's certainly true, it overlooks the fact that the nervous system is also the most concentrated in what we call microtubules. So these basically tubulin protein-based like nanotubes, basically, that in addition to transporting fluid through the cellular membrane and serving as a semi-rigid cytoskeleton for the cells in the body, also have a lot of amazing properties in terms of what we're calling ballistic conductance, which is basically like one little inkling away from room temperature superconductivity, but it's called ballistic conductance. And so it's the idea that you can have lossless conductivity through the microtubules, which is much, much faster and much more variable than what we see through the action of neurons. and the traditional, what we're calling the motor neurons and afferent and efferent neural pathways that go between the brain and the body structures and the limbs and all these different bodily movements that we consider voluntary. And so this explains how things like, a Major League Baseball batter can hit over 100-mile-an-hour fastball, which should be impossible according to this neurology model that's showing that, these motor signals are mediated by neurons, because neurons have a speed limit, and electrical conductivity of the type that occurs in the neurons again has a speed limit, and it shouldn't be fast enough for people to react to these high speed actions like, a fastball in baseball, or like, 100-mile-an-hour tennis ball flying across the tennis court. Like, how could someone react quick enough in order to be successful at playing in these high performance type sports? Well, this has always been a puzzle. And then, like I said, broad area, what's called gamma synchrony. So gamma is a brainwave that's between, I think it's like 35 hertz and up. I think now they've measured it up over 100 hertz. So it's a very fast oscillation, considered to be the fastest of the normal, what we're calling neural oscillations that you can read with an EEG and so on. But this OR theory, which was first proposed, decades ago, but now through having this OR as a theoretical model and a predictive model, now by examining these microtubules in detail, they found out that these microtubules have oscillations not only in, the 100 hertz range and above, but also into, megahertz, gigahertz, terahertz frequencies, and that you can measure now surface level oscillations up into the megahertz range, which is completely out of the scope of what we're calling the EEG, which for over 100 years now has been considered, the golden rubric of all neural activity. And certainly it's useful to understand, and it's had a lot of, it's borne a lot of fruit in terms of new theories and new understandings of human biological function. But this OR theory is like a quantum leap that goes far beyond. And so to try and get a normal layperson to understand how that is, like, I want to give a brief description of what I call predictive modeling and how that plays into the spirit war. Okay, so based on our theoretical models of life and what we consider to be possible, this, constrains and confines the endeavors that we will undertake and the things that we will try to achieve based on what we consider to be possible. And a lot of that has to do with these underlying material frameworks. Like, for instance, there's a common story that's always told in track and field of how nobody thought it was possible to run a 4-minute mile. And so no one ever did, until this guy, Roger Bannister, broke the 4-minute mile. And then suddenly people all over the world started to do it because now they considered it to be possible. And the same thing applies to all types of human endeavor. So like when you see yogis and these different, spiritual trainees be able to like walk on hot coals or like pierce their body with hot metal rods and do all this kind of stuff and inhibit their pain reflex and do all kinds of crazy shit, go into a state of suspended animation where their heart is beating less than once a minute and not die, right? Because they were inducted basically or associated with a community and with a theoretical model of human life and human biology that said, yeah, these things are possible, and they saw it done by their yogi masters and these different instructors that they would have, and so then they could similarly imitate it. Same with the Tibetans that practice tumo, and they can go out into the Himalayas and have freezing cold, yak skin put over them, and they could thaw it out just using their mind and their physiology of their body to produce intense body heat, which science would be at a loss to explain. And the same thing applies to a lot of these phenomena like telepathy, non-local consciousness, retrocausality, which are all given a theoretical mechanism of explanation through this OR theory and understanding the electrical and optical properties of these microtubules, which one can exhibit, what we call ballistic conductance. Like I said, it's almost equivalent to room temperature superconductivity, which was long thought to be impossible. Right. And also it gets involved with things like quantum superposition and more or less biological quantum computing that's occurring in our brains, in our nervous system, and in various types of tissues in the body, where due to what's called resonance structures in these pi orbitals in the microtubules, they can exist in multiple quantum states at once in a state of what we're calling quantum indeterminacy or quantum superposition, right? So while people are baffled at how, even the most sophisticated computers are not able to correctly mimic or reproduce what human brains can do, now we understand why. Is that actually the human brain is a quantum computer at room temperature, which is like millions and millions of times more efficient than what we're seeing with these artificially produced so-called quantum computers, which you have to keep at absolute zero. And so interestingly, one of these collaborators with Stuart Hameroff on this theory uh, works at the National Institute of Material Science in Japan, I believe, and has been able to, based on this microtubule theory, to create, room temperature quantum computing prototypes and biological computing systems with what he's calling brain jelly, which he's basically been able to create and nano engineer based on the understanding of these microtubules that function in the human body. And so we can see that by having this more accurate theoretical model, right, it allows us to have a quantum leap in our notions of what's possible. And so now we can undertake these scientific enterprises to create biological supercomputers and basically leapfrog over all these other billionaires in the world that are trying to basically put a stranglehold over the entire world economy and build these massive multi-billion-dollar so-called data centers and, shut down and black out the electrical grid because they want to have all this power. And so the question now becomes, well, this theory has been around, this OR has been around for many decades. So why are they still building these like Stone Age type processors that are functioning on a completely outmoded paradigm? And this is an important question to ask, unless you acknowledge that, hey, maybe their stated goals are not their actual goals, and that really it's more of just a cover story for what's really going on. And again, I would argue that a big purpose of that too is to debase humanity and to make us all think that we're inferior to these, AI basically, but which actually the opposite is completely true. Same with even robots and all these different things. Like they're nothing without us to create them, first of all, to build them and design them and give them a purpose and give them a task to undertake and so on. So if you can take that away and say that, okay, well, yeah, it's all just based on neurons and brain cells and this 100 hertz maximum type oscillatory patterns and, classical computing instead of quantum computing and quantum superposition and so on like that, it allows you to make humans feel inferior. It allows you also to mask your true scientific level of development, which is, I'm arguing, 100 or 1,000 years ahead of what we're seeing at the consumer target level, right? They have really and can create things that are much farther advanced than we've been told. And they can bogart that and they can keep it all to themselves because humans think we're on the cutting edge with like the iPhone 17 or whatever it is now that they have. They think that's the cutting edge and they're willing to go out and pay thousands of dollars for a device that's, 100 years or more out of date. And of course, there's a lot of implications as well for the medical industry because, if people knew that, yeah, we've had the secret to being able to cure Alzheimer's and dementia and cognitive decline and so on all this time, and meanwhile, since decades ago, they started studying Tibetan monks and people and seeing that they can have, long-term gamma synchrony, for minutes at a time versus, these fleeting little microsecond type gamma bursts that normal people consider normal. So, by having this theoretical model of OR, we see now how this gamma synchrony is really possible, what it is, what it does, what its aptitudes and applicabilities are, the importance of this in connection with the quantum observer principle, and the seemingly magical effects that can be accomplished with that. And so this goes a long way towards explaining, because of course these gamma synchrony phenomena are obviously very associated with human attention and human attention span. And that's why these trained meditators who have, 10,000 hours or more of meditative experience can exhibit what would be considered supernormal human abilities to the common person, because we don't live in a world where we're trained and taught and told that human attention is of supreme value and can achieve seemingly miraculous results. We're not taught and told about that. And we live in the opposite. We live in where, now the video shorts on Instagram and YouTube and everything is now the currency of the day, is like these 30-second little clips to shorten the human attention span and to prevent us from achieving gamma synchrony on an individual basis. And of course, all the high intellectual functioning and high perception and high discernment that goes along with that is all stolen from us and taken away from us, so that we can be forever subservient to the technocrats who have access to this kind of technology. And so there's a multi-front type of operation going on here. And so what I'm trying to do in this series is to tell people and just give basic information about all the scientific developments in this field, and how through modern neurofeedback and stuff like that, humans can train themselves for super normal functioning, for extraordinarily high genus level intelligence without the use of AI, how we can have basically analog AI. And by, scaling up this gamma synchrony type concept from the nerve cell level to the brain level to the human individual level, and to this synchronized consciousness of multiple human beings, and what these new thought people like Napoleon Hill and all these new thought gurus and Tony Robbins and all these people out there, what they're talking about is actually a scientific principle that can be trained and that can achieve supernormal human abilities and transform the world around us. And this is what they don't want. And so that's why I'm embarking on this whole Spirit War series and trying to introduce these theoretical frameworks so people can understand and start to contemplate their own functionality as human biological systems, and also to understand that things that are considered magical, mystical, supernormal, retrocausal, prophetic consciousness that can see beyond our normal flow of linear time, like all these things have a scientific theoretical basis. They're being confirmed by the day. And that even though quantum physics was pioneered over 100 years ago, the common person still has not introduced this theoretical framework into their conception, unless it's for, the purpose of consumer goods. They have no interface with that. And my thesis is basically, I'm saying that if people can be introduced to these concepts and they can go into training based on these concepts, and they can achieve personal excellence based on these concepts, and these concepts can spread to large numbers of people, then this can transform our society, and it can stave off this technocratic dystopia that we're staring down the barrel of right now. And so that's why I'm introducing this series. And even though we're at almost 18 minutes right now, I barely begun to scratch the surface, and there's so more. Like I said, I've been working on this for months already. And rather than finish it up, I thought I would just put this out as an introductory video. But next time we could go into these, biological quantum computers that are being designed, and the groundbreaking research that's being done in these areas, and understanding the whole domain of quantum biology, which is a multifaceted scientific discipline that's becoming more and more popular. And so I'm just trying to introduce and get my foot in the door with these concepts. And my contention is that what we're going to see in our subsequent videos is the fact that these all can translate into human abilities. They can all allow us to be victorious in the spirit war, to develop our skills, to develop our cognition, and most importantly, to network with other human beings to achieve excellence, to drive forward the scientific development away from AI as we know it now, and into the domain of human development and superhuman, what we now consider superhuman abilities, longevity, and basically maintaining peak neurological and peak biological functions into 100 years old or longer, and that there's a clear theoretical framework to allow all this to be accomplished. So I hope people appreciate this, and I hope you can stick around for the next, because we're going to have more soon.